We have built these values into all of his technology.
Yeah, and the values are deeply rooted in American values. I mean, that was one of the big themes for me, was like the acceptability of violence on these platforms. Historically, you had things like Mark Zuckerberg in 2008 or 9 saying that Holocaust denial is fine on the platform, but women can't be topless. Men can, but women can't. I don't know if you were in the Facebook privacy settlement that just happened. Did you get your $38 yet?
I did not. But
my $38 just landed in my PayPal account. Like, very grateful for that $38. How much is my data worth? That's exactly how much. We're not seeing these companies give back that money in a meaningful way, the way that we used to.
Hi, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
So this week's episode you recorded in Barcelona, where you were attending MozFest, and there was a really amazing audience and set of speakers, it sounds like. And you were able to snag some time with Jillian York, who is an activist and the director of International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the author of some books, including Silicon Values, which she wrote in 2020. And gosh, in 5 years, have things changed? So why don't you tell us a bit more about Jillian?
Jillian is an activist that has worked with people all over the world to try and make sure that we have a free and open internet, that governments and that corporations don't lock down what we can say, how we can connect, and what we can do on the internet. And her work is about understanding the way in which the creations of Silicon Valley, the creation of these big tech companies, then get applied to the reality of societies around the world. She is just so insightful in understanding how we need to fight for a free and open internet in order to bring about the social change that we so desperately need in the world.
One of the hot topics at the moment in multiple countries, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, is age verification and the impact of the internet and social media on children and teenagers. And you talked about that with her quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. She is looking at these laws and understanding the way in which they don't effectively protect children. They don't effectively protect everybody who is using social media, but they do cause us to lose rights. They cause us to have to give our IDs and our photos and other kind of information. And so we lose the right to control our own relationship with the media we have. We lose the right to speak anonymously. And in countries around the world and with these platforms that do surveillance, it's very dangerous to lose the right to communicate anonymously.
Well, this seems like a more pertinent topic than ever with all that is going on in the world. So let's take a listen.
I'm really excited to have Jillian York, the director of International Freedom of Speech for the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, author of the book Silicon Values, and really a leading advocate for an open and free internet, for considering the implications of social media and speech on the internet, and trying to find a future that works for everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here in Barcelona.
Yes. Your work at EHF, is EHF is a very San Francisco-based organization and does tons of work inside the United States, advocating for a free and open internet, advocating for the users of the internet, and trying to prevent both sort of state and corporate enclosure of the internet. But your work is overseas. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work you do outside the United States.
Sure. Yeah. So, EFF's been around since 1990 and historically, did a lot of, still does a lot of strategic litigation in the U.S. Our domestic work was focused around that for a long time. But over the years, we built up a technology team, an advocacy team, and then international team that's now sort of cross legal and advocacy. And actually, some of our technologists are international now as well. So internationally, our work looks a little bit different. We don't yet do much strategic litigation abroad, although I think that might start to change. But what we do is we work on policy mostly in the EU, but also a bit in Latin America. We've got a great team there. We do a lot of support work to assist our friends in the global majority countries on issues that are important to them. And then we also do a lot of like coalition building, coalition work around different topics, privacy. I do a lot around content moderation, free expression. I specifically work with a lot of groups in the Middle East, North Africa, or Swana region, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I mean, that can come in many different shapes. But for example, if our friends are seeing a bill come up that is particularly dangerous in their country, whether we're talking about, age verification laws in Australia or New Zealand, or, someone's been arrested in Egypt, that's something where we'll jump in and go, okay, how can we help? And often that does come in the form of sort of background support, but sometimes it also means putting our voice forward when people need that extra nudge, or when they aren't, able for whatever reason, safety or otherwise, to do that work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having this international organization and a voice with respectability helps a lot when supporting groups on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, it's really important when you're coming from a global north, and especially maybe even a US perspective, to not, be on the front lines. I was just on a panel this morning where one of my colleagues from Pakistan was saying that, it's really important that we center people from the global majority, and that they're not beneficiaries, but centers of knowledge. And, I've seen it that way for a long time. Obviously, there is a learning curve. I've been doing this work for 14 or even more years at other organizations. And, it took a while to learn that from my colleagues. But I think after this much time working in these various spaces, you realize like how much the knowledge is flowing from that direction to us. Whereas, funders and politicians often have seen it the other way around.
Yeah, so much of the internet feels like it functions in a one-way path from English to the outside world, from Silicon Valley to the outside world. I've spent a bunch of time in Latin America, and it feels like I could say anything I wanted in Spanish, and it would resonate within Spanish-speaking internet circles. But like, there's a wall, and it doesn't get back to what's going on in the English-speaking world. And so much of the restrictions on free speech and control of the internet is not happening first in the West.
Yeah. And I mean, Spanish is, and it's still a majority language. You've still got so many speakers of it. Same honestly with Arabic, although that one's a little more complicated by dialect. But when you look at some of these other places where the languages are much smaller, have far fewer speakers, the moderation space around that has been really strange for a long time, because sometimes you do have sort of, I guess what you could call sort of experimental moderation happening in those places where you've got somebody giving a close look. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have situations like what happened in Myanmar with the genocide, where at that time, I think Meta had like 8 Burmese speakers, maybe even fewer, doing that moderation. So they weren't paying enough attention to that space. Meanwhile, at that time, we had like advances in content moderation, a lot more things being taken down in English and possibly even Spanish. I'm not an expert on that one. But yeah, it is really strange that those walls still exist. I think, now we have all of these advances in technology, from your sort of basic translation apps, which I use all the time, to be fair, to AI, to all of that out there to help us kind of bridge those gaps, but it's still there. And so actually one of the things that EFF does as well is we do translate a lot of our technology, so things like Privacy Badger, which is a plugin, our surveillance self-defense guides are in, I think, 13 languages now. Don't quote me.
I think I've given it to activists so many times all over the world.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm really happy whenever I get to see it used elsewhere, and we hear great things about it. And we also, we try to cooperate with other organizations that are doing similar work too, to hear, what are you hearing? What should we be putting out there?
Just so folks know, the Surveillance Self-Defense Guide is this guide you can use that tells you concretely and in a verified way all the things you can do if you're being surveilled and how to minimize your surveillance. And it is useful whether or not you're, an activist in Bolivia or Pakistan or in the United States today.
Oh, yeah. No, we're hearing it being used a lot in protests in the U.S. right now. And, I think when you're looking at like the U.S. or some other I don't know I never know what term to use, but some other more technologically advanced countries, for lack of a better word, and particularly more technologically advanced when it comes to police surveillance and military surveillance. I think that, it's so important that people be aware of these things, because you're up against stingrays, you're up against, police surveillance that's happening on the streets and these protests, listening device, all of that stuff, not to get conspiratorial, but it's all happening, right? And so we've tried to really reach out to groups in the US and other places where this is going on, to say, hey, like, you have to recognize that these threats have come home to you too, if they weren't always there in the first place.
And I think it's important to realize that it's not like the police have to be technologically sophisticated in these places.
Not at all.
Because there's a giant industry now of vendors that are going around and selling this, hardware and software for surveillance to polices and governments all over the world.
Yeah, no, surveillance has gotten really inexpensive. And I think that that's the thing that maybe a lot of non-activists don't understand or haven't noticed yet. And so when it's that cheap, it can come to you anywhere. So I'm thinking a lot right now about, like, when I cross borders, including the one to my home country, the US, because I live abroad, like, what things do I need to do that I haven't really thought about, in the last presidency, or maybe I should have been thinking about them, but now, the threat has really gotten more severe for many of us.
And there's an effort that we see in Europe and the United States, other places, to try and break the privacy encryption of these things. There's an effort to say that we shouldn't have end-to-end encryption in chat, that, there was pressure on Apple to disable good encryption of people's devices, of the cloud devices. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the way in which there's pressure to prevent the security that's built into these technologies.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think end-to-end encryption, do your listeners know?
End-to-end encryption
go for it.
End-to-end encryption is the idea that your communication is encrypted from your device, an app in your device, all the way to the other person. And no one in the intermediary can see it. And usually no one who isn't logged in and authorized on the device could see it. So it's encrypted at rest on the devices. And that means that you can have real private communication, and not just the content of the communication, but the metadata, who is speaking to whom, because that is as important as the content. We're seeing Israel using who is in participation in group WhatsApps as a way of targeting, and they don't actually know who they're bombing. And this isn't just like Israel. Even back to the Obama administration, they were, sending cruise missiles based on who texted who and who called who, and they didn't know who these people were.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take that to, like, an example that maybe applies to your average, well, maybe not, more your average person too. You have women who are seeking abortions in states where that has become increasingly, restricted or illegal. That metadata can then be used to go, hey, you were at this place at this time, and so this is one of the reasons that end-to-end encryption is so important as well, to be able to communicate in those contexts. And yeah, so the push to then try to break it. I mean, we've seen this for a long time. Like, when I started thinking about end-to-end encryption, when I first learned what it was, the tools were a lot more difficult to use, right? Like PGP, which maybe some people have heard of, pretty good privacy. It was pretty good, but it was also complicated, and you had to know
painful
things.
To use.
Painful, very painful. Didn't work well with my mail app. All that jazz. As much as I respect it, but now we have Signal. We have WhatsApp, which uses end-to-end encryption. Although I would still say use Signal.
Use Signal because you can't really trust Meta to be an honest broker.
Yeah, exactly. The technology might be good, but there might still be other issues with it. And so, yeah, Signal is the way to go. But Signal is under threat. And part of the reason for trying to break end-to-end encryption that we're seeing from politicians in the US, but also elsewhere, is things like, one of the big ones is child sexual abuse imagery. The idea that someone could share, I'm going to use the acronym CSAM because it's shorter, that somebody could share CSAM content on an end-to-end encrypted network, and that police and law enforcement can't then get to that and find that person. That's a reason for politicians to say this shouldn't exist at all. Never mind the safety of activists. Never mind the safety of women seeking abortion, medical care. Never mind, people in Gaza.
Never mind the lack of funding and actual police response to real abuses of children in people's communities. You have all these situations where you're like, we need to break the internet. We need to break everyone's privacy so that we can stop this, child sex abuse. And yet there's no funding for the work in schools, for the psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers that would actually engage in it, and very weak prosecution of the actual real cases. It becomes this boogeyman instead of saying, well, this is a problem.
Yeah.
And we need to prioritize addressing it, and addressing it in the offline world where it really happens.
Exactly. I mean, CSAM is a huge problem, and victims obviously, want that content removed, want it gone, want the people who are sharing it prosecuted. Absolutely. But yeah, we spend so many more resources, or states spend so many more resources going after the people sharing the content around than the people who created it or the people who are in the videos or in the photos. And, when you look at the hierarchy of perpetration, those are the people that have caused possibly the most harm. Again, I don't want to speak for victims in this case, but you can see just how unbalanced it is in terms of who's being prosecuted, who's being targeted, and then who the collateral damage is from the ways in which those methods are implemented.
It's such a complicated thing to figure out how do we provide privacy and address the issues, because the moment you break privacy, the moment you break end-to-end encryption, the moment you open the door, create a backdoor by which, somebody can get in, it's not going to be just that person. It's not going to be just the government with a court order and these kind of controls, because then the companies can come in, then hacked software comes in, or people use APIs that they, didn't know were available. And, that's why we see these, the privacy nightmare of you can buy the real-time location of people based on their phone numbers, because the United States doesn't have privacy laws. And the app developers of all these games are installing little SDK extensions, and the companies running them are then running these massive data brokers where they're selling everyone's data.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the people, the people coming up with the laws, with the regulations, who are proposing let's end encryption. That is a very hard sentence. Let's end anonymity. They're not thinking about the marginalized communities that are the most impacted by that. And a couple of years ago, I semi-jokingly sent off a tweet saying yeah, that's the white man's gambit, when some white guy pops up every couple of years ago and says, let's end this thing. And then it somehow got quoted in a bunch of books. And it's so funny because it crops up every once in a while. But this really does happen. It's not always a white dude, but it often is. And it's so frustrating to see, because I do feel like there's this huge disconnect in, politicians and policymakers not listening to the most impacted groups.
I went to a forum where, this was in New Zealand a bunch of years ago, and we had Aboriginal women from Australia, and we had Maori women in New Zealand, and we had sort of some trans folks, and they were all talking about their experiences online. And this Crocodile Dundee-like guy, who is just, he was a Kiwi, but, he totally looked like Crocodile Dundee. He had the clothes and everything. He goes, gosh, I don't understand. I've never been treated poorly on the internet.
Oh, my slow clap is.
I mean, he was there and he was listening.
Yeah.
But I think that typifies that everybody's experience on social media is radically different, and that on the internet is radically different. And one of the problems with many of the existing social media platforms is there were literally no women in positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
Or if there were women on the founding team, like Crystal was part of the founding team of Twitter, no one talks about her. And even though she brought it up millions of times,
mm-hmm.
she wasn't listened to.
Yeah, and you had no women, but also very few people of color, very few people with international backgrounds. And this is how you end up with things like, Meta, Facebook's real name policy. I remember there's a Mark Zuckerberg quote. It's in my book. I'm not going to quote it correctly right now, but it's something about people shouldn't have more than one identity because it shows a lack of integrity.
Yeah.
Yeah, except those people who, are queer youth existing in I don't want to insult any states in particular, but like, I don't know, let's say Mississippi, or, you know, again, women seeking abortion, activists in Palestine, activists facing whatever challenge wherever in the world. Oh, but, you know, they're not our target audience. You could tell what these platforms were really thinking around it. And we're still seeing this come up. We see it with, you know, all of these different spaces where either anonymity or end-to-end encryption or whatever it is, it's either an afterthought or it's like, no, we're not doing that.
And, you know, the one example we have today of a company, a substantial social media company that isn't founded by men is Blue Sky. Jay Graber is a woman of color. Rose Wang is also a woman of color. She's the COO. And I think that that's part of why Blue Sky has this different thing. It was incredibly frustrating to me that all the press said it was Jack Dorsey's Blue Sky, where he provided the funding. Like, he helped make it happen. But they were literally writing out the women of color who were actually founding and running this company.
Yeah. And then he was like, also, I think he spoke out kind of like, I'm not even behind this idea anymore, you know, in like a negative way too, a few weeks after. Yeah, no, that's really frustrating to me. And I think, like, look, there are challenges with Blue Sky. I think that, you know, one of the things that they got a little bit wrong, and I don't know the founders, to be fair, one of the things they got a little bit wrong was they didn't consider how much content moderation was going to be necessary. And so they didn't think ahead before they launched. And then they had to catch up on a number of different areas. And that's created challenges like seeing, you know, Palestinians being flagged as spam because they're leaving comments on a lot of people's things saying, hey, I need money for food, right? And I mean, these are all challenges for moderation, don't get me wrong, but it does feel like a lot of it came as a bit of an afterthought, and now there's this scramble happening.
You know, it's ironic that it came as an afterthought, because the stated existence and reason for Blue Sky is that Twitter had an impossible moderation problem, and that the solution was to build an open protocol. This is Mike Masnick. He's on the board of Blue Sky, and I've talked to him on this podcast, but he said in his Protocols Not Platforms that we'll use internet protocols to solve free speech issues and solve moderation issues. And the Blue Sky team came in and said, oh, we'll use internet protocols and then we won't do it. And you can just run your own servers if you want to do it. And they had a moment early on where, like everyone who runs a social platform, they discovered it's much more complicated than they thought.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's my criticism of a lot of these conversations around decentralization. I'm a huge fan of Mike Masnick. I am a huge fan of the Blue Sky team, but I think that when some people think about moderation, they're thinking of it from this high policy or protocol level, and they're not looking at the actual cases, the actual use cases. And that's what I've spent my whole career doing, is looking at exactly who's impacted, exactly what happened. You know, I have worked in the past with companies directly to try to get accounts restored or very dangerous content taken down, things that could provide a real threat, that sort of thing. A lot of the folks that I work with run helplines that do that kind of work as well. And there's a lot of them now, although all struggling at the moment. But that's where I think, like, of all the people I've talked to in moderation over the years, the only one that I ever really heard that sort of hard level thinking from was somebody who worked at Yahoo in the early days.
Really?
Yeah. And her name's in my book, but I'm blanking on it right now. But they created it from the ground up because they had no policies. They had nothing. And so her team, which was from varied backgrounds. I remember she said she even had I don't want to misquote, but she had a very, very diverse and somewhat working class team. And they were sitting there with a notebook writing down, okay, this happened. Let's create a policy around this. And it was just so fascinating. And then by the time I think the other platforms came around, you had executives working at them, or you had these Stanford grads. Meta was all Stanford grads in the early days on the policy team. And it's like, I all due respect to Stanford, but like, I don't think that lack of diversity works in that context. You have to have people who have had these experiences or talking to people who have had these experiences. I
mean, it's almost like we need to remember the disability rights movement with nothing about us without us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. You have to talk to the trans people. You have to talk to the women in like dangerous contexts. You have to talk to the human rights activists. You have to talk to people in Gaza or wherever. I don't want to leave out other places in the world, but Gaza, we can use Gaza as the stand-in to center Palestine.
So it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk to all these people.
It's hard, yeah.
And you've been studying and advocating on this stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
What do we do?
You know what? If I knew I wish I knew. And that's the thing. Like I've had to acknowledge, because, early on when I was working on this, I was like, let's just not moderate content. And then it's like, oh, wait, but there are these threats and these really very real things and people getting doxxed. And okay, so we have to do this. And my views have changed constantly over the years. And so I've definitely studied this. I definitely talked to all of those people, but I'm still a white American.
Yeah.
And I think that, I would want to put together the best committee possible. I think that that's what I would be good at, is to bring together all of the people globally who have thought about this and put us in that boardroom instead of, this group of non-diverse executives. And that's where I've been frustrated in recent years, because I'm not seeing Blue Sky do the work to listen to those folks.
Yep.
In the past, Meta puts together these meetings. I know there's one coming up soon, where they bring folks from a specific region. But do any of the things that they say get implemented? I don't think so. Twitter used to bring people in during a certain period, but then that kind of died off. And then with the X takeover, it's gone. There's no conversation anymore at all with them. And so, yeah, I mean, I hate to do the cop-out thing and say I'm not sure, but I think that that's the first step, is bringing together the people who've actually studied this closely in their regional and cultural contexts, have those contexts on the ground, and can bring forth real life examples of what's happening to build a policy around that, rather than building a policy and hoping it works for those examples, which is, I think, what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, and we have some hints of this. We have Rudy's Project Black Sky, which I've talked about many times. He's here at the MozFest here in Barcelona, where he's not waiting for someone else to do it. He's saying that the Black community shouldn't have what happened with Black Twitter, where they use the platform, they love the platform, but they had an adversarial relationship with the platform.
Yeah.
And how to build your own technology stack and your own moderation tool. They have a moderation team of Black people moderating for Black people. But that's a really unique thing.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I'm very glad that community has the resources to do that. I think that when you're looking outside of the global minority countries, the West, whatever you want to call it, you don't always have the resources or the time or the capacity to build that sort of thing. So like, massive credit to those folks. But I don't see that working in communities that are maybe even more under threat than the Black community in the global North, which is not to say that they're not facing threats. Again, I gotta give these caveats. I mean, I think, like, now that I'm thinking about it, there are other things I would do. I think we have to stop with the AI solutionism around content moderation and around most things. That's been one of my frustrations, is just we don't need a human in the loop for this stuff. Look, maybe there are some things like CSAM that are child sexual abuse imagery that are so far beyond the pale that we stick AI on it. Fine. But for the vast majority of content, it's not going to work, and it's going to cause collateral damage.
Yeah.
And then, I think also the other things that I've pushed for a long time are just more transparency to the users, more appeals for users. Users should be able to appeal any decision. And we don't see that. I've had moderation happen to me on Meta.
It's a governance problem.
Yeah,
We
it's a
have
governance problem. Exactly.
But we are governing these platforms like monarchies.
Yeah, they're monarchies. They're absolutely monarchies. Silicon Values, the reason that the book was titled that is because these are like the values of white dudes from Silicon Valley. And Silicon obviously being a little bit of a pun there. There needs to be more democracy within these companies and within the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the process of going from working in startups, I was born in Berkeley. Like, I am a product of the California experience. I grew up and started working in startups in high school. And so when we brought out the internet and when we started reaching the world and we started creating these platforms, my initial perspective was, this is amazing. Like, all these things that we hold true around sort of this combination of a little bit of libertarian, a little bit of anarchist ideology, but also social democracy and also counterculture, everything Fred Turner talks about in his books. I was like, great, we're taking this to the world. And it turns out that what works for me and my world, one, is deeply flawed. It doesn't acknowledge class. It doesn't acknowledge sexuality beyond the queer men's experience. San Francisco and in Silicon Valley is very good if you are a gay man.
Yeah.
Like Sam Altman, Peter Thiel, Keith Roboy, like
Even if
there's a
you're-
whole cabal of incredibly successful, cis gay men, and their values are embedded in all of the things. And, by extension, other queer communities are along. But what I didn't realize, and I think that Silicon Valley still doesn't realize, is that its values shouldn't be the values that everybody else has to abide by.
Yeah.
And we have built these values into all of its technology.
Yeah, and the values are deeply rooted in American values. I mean, that was one of the big themes for me, was like the acceptability of violence on these platforms for a long time. That has shifted a little bit with things like what happened in Christchurch, and the ensuing building of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. Got it right, GIFCT. But historically, you had things like Mark Zuckerberg's in 2008 or 9 saying that Holocaust denial was fine on the platform. But, women can't be topless. Men can, but women can't. Right. And it's like, that to me is deeply American. Having lived in Europe now for 11 years, and, having grown up in the kind of hippie culture in the US anyway, for me, it's like, no. Nudity should be okay. To some degree, violence should not be. And instead, we've got the opposite coming out of these platforms, because that is the dominant culture in the US.
Yeah.
And a lot of the world looks at that and goes, what? Like, why? So I think that is ultimately the problem for me, is who is leading and where those folks are, not even where they're coming from geographically, but where they're coming from in terms of values.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Samari McCarthy, who you might know, is a member of parliament from the Pirate Party in Iceland.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Okay,
and Samari used to joke that he should make a law in Iceland that says that Facebook has to allow, and social media platforms have to allow nudity in Iceland, because nudity is, and stop violence. And it is actually a totally reasonable thing that the Icelandic government should be able to say, look, these are things that are acceptable to Iceland and in public forums. And yet the very idea that Iceland might be able to have a say was absurdity. I mean, it was a joke.
There was a push from, I want to say, Denmark or Sweden too, for the same thing. And I remember being on a panel with, I want to say, and I don't remember if it was an MP or an MEP from one of those countries, but saying the same thing. And so this was like a real movement at some point. And, Meta did make some concessions when there was pushback to the toplessness thing. First, they were like, okay, breastfeeding images are okay. And that, I remember that because I had been on the phone with them in 2015. And then a week later, they made that change. And I can't take credit for it, but I think I was one of many people that they were consulting with on that question. Then they said, okay, like this, for indigenous communities, it's okay. And then the question of trans bodies came up, and they did not know what to do, because you had people, posting, like you had
before and after pictures.
Yeah. Before and after pictures. You had people cutting and pasting male nipples onto other bodies. You had all sorts of things going on where people were doing this creative activism around it. And I can't remember what the outcome was in the end, but I know that on that particular question, Meta has progressed a little bit in the right direction. But I mean, I don't know how long that'll last. And it's still always a challenge for them. And this is where I want to acknowledge it is a real challenge when it comes to nudity and toplessness, because AI and humans cannot easily detect the difference between somebody who's 17, somebody who's 18. That's a real challenge.
Which brings me to the idea of age verification. So we have we have movements around the world which say that there are bad things that happen to kids on the internet, and that kids have developing brains, and that we have norms in society that say if you're under a certain age, you can't do things. You can't vote, you can't drink alcohol, you can't smoke cigarettes. So we should apply those rules to the internet platforms. There's a certain logic that makes sense on that. But the way it's implemented, we very quickly get to the point where you can't just say only minors need to identify their age, because you don't know who a dog is. You don't know that you're a dog on the internet. You don't know who's using it. And so they have proposed, well, we'll just put a camera up and have the AI look at the photo of the person.
Yeah. And I mean, I was in the UK shortly after the Online Safety Act passed, and I think this has changed now, but as a non-resident of the UK, it was actually quite hard for me to verify I don't remember exactly what had happened, but there were questions around like who can verify themselves. What if you don't have ID? What if you don't? Because there's an ID-based system using, I think, Persona, or at least that's how Reddit's doing it.
Yep.
And so I remember going on and thinking, okay, I'm going to check on Reddit and see what I can see, what I can't see. You know that you're not going to be able to see the nudity, the
things that
not
are
safe
already
for work
flagged
stuff.
as not safe for work.
I couldn't read the Berlin subreddit from London. I was like, this is what's in there that's so bad. Why can't a young person read it? And so it doesn't make sense, the implementation. But I also think on a big picture level, on a broader level, when it comes to social media, like I'm not going to say there are no harms. I think that obviously, filters, the amount of time people, both young and older, spend on these platforms can cause harm. I do believe that. But, we're taking this nanny state approach instead of talking about education, talking about parenting, putting, time limits on the amount of time that younger people can use it, from the parents, not from the state. And then I'm not saying we should, but we could say ban filters, right? Ban filters, ban all the stuff that makes young women in particular, experience all sorts of difficulties. But instead, we're taking away the right of people to communicate, and we're taking away the right of marginalized youth to communicate, people who might be less safe in the home than they are with people that they know online. And I know people who are in that position. I know people my age, who in the, let's say, mid to late 90s were using the internet to connect with other queer people because they didn't know any in their hometown, or because they were in an unsafe environment with their parents and needed assistance. Same goes for, people seeking reproductive care, all of the examples we've talked about, and many more. And that to me is the real harm here. It's not so much the you can't, spend too much time on TikTok. It's although, to acknowledge TikTok's got some good too. But it's the communication impact for me that really just hits hard.
And, in my case, I live in New Zealand, and there's a proposal to ban social media. And I've been running a campaign, b416.nz, if you want to see the website. And I've been running a campaign because I was very worried about this age verification. I was very worried about social media bans. A few weeks ago, at the end of October, they finally introduced the legislation, and so we could finally see the law that they were proposing. And the text of the law says that everyone who has a platform that communicates from being able to message from one person to another needs to verify the age of the people messaging and needs to block people under 16. So, it's just the first reading of the law. So it's it will go through iterations. But the direct reading of that is they thought they were saying, I'm worried about teenage girls getting bullied at school, or I'm worried about the body image stuff. And they don't know what they're doing. And so they wrote a law that's going to ban mobile phones.
Yeah, and it's going to prevent young people from texting their parents when they need a ride home from the mall, or texting in an emergency. And that's the kind of really harmful collateral damage that it's clear that they didn't think about. And I think that we see this a lot with our lawmakers. We see it in the U.S. with attempts at legislation around trying to end Section 230, the Kids Online Safety Act in the U.S. We've seen it in Australia. I think there are places that have done a little bit better. I think that, I have a lot of criticisms about the UK's Online Safety Act, but I do think that they thought through some of this a little bit more than some of the other places that we've talked about. And I don't know how we solve that political problem, because it's very clear to me that a lot of the people making our laws and some of the people around them advising them don't understand how the technology works and don't understand the impact. Haven't done the due diligence to ensure that they're talking to some of the potentially most impacted people.
Or they're being disingenuous. A lot of
absolutely.
the campaign going on in the United States and the Trump administration is around this Project 2025. And they're on the surface saying, oh, we're just trying to prevent minors from seeing pornography, and we're trying to do them. But they actually want to prevent queer people from talking to each other.
Yeah.
They want queer youth to not be able to find support because they think that somehow people will stop being queer if they don't see cute videos about it. And they want to prevent all pornography from being out there. And their goal is saying, well, we'll get rid of people watching pornography by making you, turn on your webcam or give your driver's license.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then on the other side of it, you've got maybe not right at this moment, but you've had Democrats trying to score political points by pushing bills forward that are also harmful for free expression. And I think some of what we're seeing now with the Republicans is backlash to that.
Yeah.
Because they've been calling a lot of the folks on the center and the left, censors for a long time. They've been, a lot of the folks on the right in the U.S. have been championing themselves as free speech advocates, and now we're seeing just this shift happen. I don't trust any of them, to be honest. I think we do have some allies out there in the political space, but they're few and far between. And I really worry that we don't have any sort of vision happening in the U.S. and a lot of other places around what the internet should look like. I don't know if that vision ever existed in the political space, but it certainly doesn't right now.
There have been times where if you look at the original opening up the internet for commercial use and a bunch of other things like that, where there was a lot of sort of, let's see what happens and let's go out there. And then it became really valuable. And they're like, different people want to control it for their own interests.
Yeah, fair. No, I think that's all before my time. So I'll say in my professional lifetime, before my time, I definitely know some of the history, but I can't speak to it as well as you, who've been here doing this work for a lot longer.
So what other things should we be thinking about? Should we be advocating for? So we're in a world where we're very concerned about authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a world where we have these massive social media companies, some of whom want this regulation because it prevents competition to them.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Blue Sky was unable to implement the ID and age verification rules that the state of Mississippi passed. So you can't access Blue Sky in the state of Mississippi because Mississippi said you have to verify everybody on the platform. And Blue Sky is not going to verify every user around the world. Who's advocating for the right thing, and how do we figure out what we should be fighting for?
Yeah, so I think who's advocating for the right thing is a great question. I work a lot in global civil society spaces, and I think that a lot of the best thinking is coming from people on the front lines, people on the ground. And there's so many amazing digital rights organizations out there, human rights organizations as well. We also, I think there's been a lot more collaboration the past few years with groups that are working on environmental justice, reproductive rights, indigenous rights, etc. And so I've really seen that expansion of that space happen, and more cross collaboration and more recognition of the direction in which knowledge flows, directions in which. But at the same time, these groups are underfunded. They're struggling. People are burnt out. There's, a mental health crisis in this space for sure. And so what I want to see happen is, more support given to those people, whether we're talking about funders or whatever, but also more acknowledgement and direct action from companies and from people in the political sphere to bring those people to the table. That's the first step for me, always. And, I'm much more likely to say that than to prescribe specific solutions these days, because I think that's been my biggest lesson over the years is I don't think I should be the one providing the solutions. But yeah, I guess beyond that, I think we need a broader reckoning with all of these questions, and we need to slow down the speed in which these proposals are coming forward. But I don't feel like in most of these countries that the politicians have any interest in listening to us. I think that we've sort of moved on. Now we're in the AI hype era. Digital rights and human rights were the hot topic 5 years ago, but we're just sort of being left in the dust at this point.
And now everyone's focused on AI.
Yep.
And everyone is, obsessed with it.
The funders are obsessed with it. They're funding that instead of frontline work.
Which isn't to say that AI isn't important, that the large language models aren't interesting or aren't important or don't have a large impact. In many ways, it's a replication of the cycles of this, where the AI companies come in and say, regulate us. And they're saying regulate us because they want regulatory protection. They want regulatory capture by which they can then set the rules and they can prevent other people from coming in and competing.
Yeah. And I'm not going to voice my specific opinions on AI because they are my personal ones rather than my organization's. I don't work on it at EFF, but one of the things that really does concern me with this sort of AI bubble more broadly is that, the funding of the space is happening faster. It's happening at the speed of light. And then these companies, these AI companies, have a ton of money, and they're not pulling that back into the community.
Yep.
I don't know what they're using it on, but whatever it is, it's
Well,
not
a massive rollout of data center construction and buying NVIDIA chips.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's harming the environment. It's taking away funds that could be provided to people on the front lines doing human rights work. And so throw some of that back. I mean, that would be my call. That's what I want to say about AI. Throw it back into the communities in which you have data centers. Throw it back into the digital rights or human rights or whatever your just cause is, but don't take up this much space, and stop coming to my sessions and telling me why I should be, symbiotic with AI. Please just do that. Please just stop.
There's just this tendency of the sexy topic of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And
remember NFTs?
Yep. There's a reason why people are skeptical at AI, because the tech industry has this tradition of showing up and saying whatever the new hotness is going to change the world. And NFTs and blockchains and these whole things, and there was never a there.
Yeah.
Blockchain is just a slow, expensive database that lets you invent money. And when anyone tried to build a real thing with it, it didn't work. And so now everyone who is likely to be skeptical of these things, they're just like, oh, the AI thing, it's just like blockchain. It's not going to.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think, just to be a little fair on the other side, like I have a friend who's doing a blockchain media project. I cannot explain how it works, so I won't even try. But I like seeing that there are now people going, what are the innovative ways that I can get in on this funding spree? I think with AI too, I don't want to deny the fact that there are usages for large language models. I'm less interested in the sort of scarier AI, but for large language models, for media, for human rights workers, I've seen it hasn't launched yet, so I can't name it, but there was a media organization that was struggling to pull together their own archives because Google's broken. When I do research now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm using chatbots to just be like, can you pull up articles on what's going on in the Lebanese digital rights space? Because Google can't do that for me anymore.
Yeah.
I know, the organizations I can look at, but it takes time. This media organization built their own thing to bring together their whole, I don't know how many years, but decades-long archive. That's a great usage. And I'm hearing that from people here, and I'm hearing that from people around the world, that they want to use these tools, but they want to use them with better privacy policies. They don't want their stuff getting out there in the world. We saw what happened with that with ChatGPT. And they don't want to feed into this crazy environmental impact of AI. And so how do we do that? What can we, are there ways we can sandbox these tools for people, or what's available? And I would like to see more thinking around that.
Yeah. And in terms of, the training of these models, they brought everybody's data in. They literally used all of our data, all of the creation of humanity, which was effectively a commons. And then they're enclosing it and saying that they're not going to share it back out. And so it's stealing your things if they go off and they don't release it back.
I'm one of the people who's some of my content was pirated by that one firm, and now there's that settlement, $3 million settlement, maybe even more. But yeah, no, I mean they stole from us.
And the irony is that when teenagers stole an MP3 file, we went after them with huge fines.
Mm-hmm. Still do in Germany.
And yet, when very large wealthy companies go do it, it's okay, or they pay fines that they can afford.
But that's always been true of corporations. I mean, I think that extractivism exists in so many different areas and so many different, we see it, I think we've seen that, historically with some of the big tech companies before. Google Book settlement is a great example, right? And that was sort of the proto era of all of this. There's no repercussions. And even when there is a settlement, you don't, I don't know if you were in the Facebook privacy settlement that just happened. Did you get your $38 yet?
I did not, but
my $38 just landed in my PayPal account. Very grateful for that $38. How much is my data worth? That's exactly how much. We're not seeing these companies give back that money in a meaningful way, the way that we used to. I can say, I think publicly, that EFF was previously a beneficiary from some of those settlements, which helped us do litigation work.
Yep.
And that's fantastic. And I know other groups have been as well. And I'm not certain about this, but I have not seen that happen at all with the AI companies. I haven't seen them give back in the same way when they could.
They'll give back because there's pressure to.
Yeah.
Like that's the reality, is that companies don't concede things without incentives and pressure. And we're so excited about it, or we're so worried about it, that we're not asking for concrete reparations for the things that have been taken. AI in social media was for a long time just the algorithm. The idea that there was this algorithm that I didn't have a say over, I didn't have a control over, and it was showing me things I wanted to see but didn't want to see, or I didn't have any agency over it. And we have lots of debates of this, and Blue Sky and some others. Nostr also lets you choose which algorithms you want, and there's sort of a marketplace or a commons of algorithms. But so many of the algorithms are written to optimize engagement, optimize for ad consumption, optimize for this passive experience. And in order to reach an audience as a creator, you just have to play the algorithm game. You have to
Yep.
do what works for them. Now we have AI content being created.
Yeah.
And companies like OpenAI launching Sora and Meta AI's, social media platforms that only are AI. And they're trying to remove the people out of social media.
Yeah, and I don't really understand why. I mean, well, culturally, I guess I sort of do. Like with Meta, we all remember the hype around the metaverse, which never quite panned out, as far as I know. I mean, that was something that I looked at it and I was
tens
like,
of billions of dollars on it.
yeah, I looked at those ads that they put out. I'm like, who is this for? Who wants that? It's the same thing like when I go to Newark Airport's the one I can think of, and all of the restaurants in the food court now are robots. Like you can't talk to a human. So when your food doesn't come out, you're like, what? Who do I? But there is a class of people who want that world where they never have to interact with another person, and I think the rest of us don't. And I think the majority doesn't. And that's one of the things that is really frustrating for me about the way that the people in these tech companies are thinking, because that's who they're building for. I cannot imagine a use case for an AI only social media platform. I just don't get it.
And yet they're spending a huge amount of money and a huge amount of effort building it. And every time I see an AI video, the top comment is, "This is AI, and why am I having to see this thing?"
Yeah.
I think part of it is the power balance, that it is sexy, it is new, people like new stuff, and there are no content creators to get upset and organize and demand payments for it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just want to mention it because it's so cool. I don't know if you've seen this, but the singer Rosalia, Spanish, had just put out this new album, and she's been talking about it, how zero AI, she wants to take AI out of music, and she made this very human album where she brings in actual, string instruments and orchestra, like bringing it all back into that space. And so I think we're starting to see this. I mean, artists have been at the forefront of a lot of this pushback, but I think we're starting to see more concrete, like protests, artistic protests and others around this. And that's what I want to see more of.
Yeah. I mean, that gets back to the origin of Ned Ludd and the Luddite movement. That we think of Luddites as this idea of like this anti-technology, throw your cog into the gears of the machine. But that's not what the Luddite movement was about. It was about the humanity and the relationship to the economic system that was transforming with these machines.
That's right, yeah.
A neo-Luddite isn't someone who does not have a computer. A neo-Luddite isn't someone who doesn't use the internet and social media. A neo-Luddite is someone who is objecting to the economic, political, and technological systems that alienate the humanity from these systems.
Yeah, no, I remember my good friend Ala Abdel Fattah, who's recently released in Egypt. I remember him talking about this or writing about this. I hope he doesn't listen and go, I didn't say that, but forgive me. But yeah, I remember him writing about this back in like 2011 about being a neo-Luddite. And because of that objection, that was where I first learned that term. So yeah, there's that. I think we need more, I want more of a slow tech movement, right? Like I don't want all of this rapid development. I want to see us go back to what do we really need these things for?
Yeah, and just to refer back to him, he is a technologist, an open source activist who is Egyptian and was responsible for posting the websites about pro-democracy protests, about anti-sectarian protests against different religious groups. And he was thrown into jail on trumped up charges, and they just kept adding more and more and more over a decade. And finally, after a tremendous amount of campaigning by his family and human rights activists around the world, he finally was given a pardon and was released. But that's a chilling story to anyone else who wants to post stuff on the internet for social change.
No, he was absolutely scapegoated by the Egyptian government. I think that that's fair to say. Made an example of, and I mean, he was not the only one. There's a campaign that was like "Free Allah, free them all" was the hashtags, and there's still the "Free them all." It's still happening actively right now.
But now we have him out, so we can at least advocate and have a voice again.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's his eloquence that made him the scapegoat because he was so good at speaking in 2 languages about all of these issues. But yeah, he's out. I've talked to him a few times. I'm very grateful. And yeah, hopefully he'll be back in action in these spaces as soon as he wants to be.
That's actually a fairly hopeful thing to wrap up on. This, Allah is an activist, a software developer, an advocate and user of these technologies who was literally thrown in an Egyptian prison for more than a decade because of his speech. And that's why we need the rights to use these platforms with encryption, with anonymity, with freedom, with user control, because he was thrown in jail in part because of his social media content and because that the state didn't want to hear that stuff. And if we build a world that makes it easy to surveil people, makes it easy to find out who's saying what and get all of their data.
And their IP address, yeah, all of it.
That we'll have a world where there's many more Allahs.
Exactly.
So Jillian, so much of your work is about this campaigning, and so much of it is sometimes behind the scenes or with these organizations or lobbying governments. But what is so clear is that it's not just an elite thing. It's not just the professionals in this, and that the only way we do this is we build a movement. I wonder if you could talk about your books, talk about EFF, talk about the campaign. Where can people learn more?
Sure. So EFF first, it's at EFF.org, HTTPS at the beginning, of course. And yeah, you can find my writing there. You can find all my colleagues' work there. Our guide that we mentioned, Surveillance Self-Defense, is ssd.eff.org. It's in like 13-ish languages. Please feel free to send feedback on that if you want to see something else around safety. My book, Silicon Values, The Future of Free Speech Under Surveillance Capitalism, you can buy it from Verso or your local bookstore, please. Not the big multinational giant that shall remain nameless. And what else? I'm on Blue Sky. I'm easy to find there. I think I'm just Jillian.bluesky.social. But I do want to just shout out to some of the groups just really quickly that I do a lot of work with these days because I want to center them. One of the big coalitions that I've been working with that EFF's a member of is the Middle East Alliance for Digital Rights, Madar. I don't remember the URL, but it's easy to find. We work a lot with EDRI in Europe and with the IFEX network globally, which is a free expression network that's been around for probably about as long as the EFF.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Everyone should check out Jillian's work and all the work of the EFF and the other campaigns because it's so important.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Jillian York for coming on revolution.social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan from Flock.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights and sign up for our email newsletter, visit revolution.social.
And for more interviews like this one, follow revolution.social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, nostasfountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatista subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.